As we stand at the precipice of what may prove to be the most epic anticlimax in the history of American politics, I'm joined once again by Larry Klayman to shed some light on this forthcoming Robert Mueller report. Larry, how are you tonight?
I'm very good, Jason. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for joining me so late. I know you're very busy with all the cases that you're handling. Nobody except for William Barr, a mutual favorite of ours, has actually seen this Mueller report yet, but there's been a lot of talk, a lot of anticipation. Do we know for sure, Larry, that there are no additional indictments that will be issued by this forthcoming report?
We know, Jason, that my client and good friend Jerry Corsi is out of the woods. He's not going to be indicted, proving again that a good offense is a good defense. I mean, we did succeed. Jerry's very happy. His family is extremely happy. And even Jeffrey Toobin of CNN sent him, quote, personal congratulations.
Huh.
You know, they're having to eat a little bit of crow over there at CNN, at least with regard to Jerry. But we don't know exactly what are behind the curtain here with regard to Robert Mueller. It's premature to make any kind of prediction. We do know, based on leaks, that there are 3 sealed indictments. That's not concerning my client, Jerry Corsi, but there may be some Russians out there. There's maybe national security matters, and they may be what hasn't been revealed yet. But what is interesting, though, is that, you know, the president has not, in fact, been indicted, and that's, of course, because department policy is that you cannot indict the sitting president. But when I say it's interesting is that, and what's good is that Jared Kushner hasn't been indicted, Don Jr. hasn't been indicted, the others haven't been indicted. I never thought they would be, because that would be a firestorm. I mean, that's going after the president's family. And I'm glad from a personal perspective, as Toobin said with regard to Jerry, that they weren't. And I do believe that when this comes out, there won't technically be any kind of finding of a crime in terms of Russian collusion. Perhaps there may be with regard to obstruction of justice. I don't know. I don't think that the president colluded with anyone. I don't think he obstructed justice, but don't expect that this leopard is going to change his spots. Robert Mueller and his leftist staff will have written a very damning, from a political perspective, report. So high-fiving right now, as I saw in this morning's Fox and Friends with Tom Fitton and Sarah Carter and others, I don't think they know what they're talking about, because this report is not going to be flattering, to say the least. And the fact that the Attorney General, in fact, he was going to release a summary this evening, is now delaying that until tomorrow, means that there's some stuff in there that he's dealing with right now, probably trying to damp it down quite a bit.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly you and I have had extensive conversations about how we don't necessarily have any kind of high expectations for anything coming from William Barr. It's certainly possible that he's also working, you know, sort of with Mueller to make this report seem, obviously, if it's a one-page thing that says, yeah, we found nothing after 2 years and $25 million, it doesn't reflect very well on Robert Mueller, does it?
No, it doesn't reflect well, but, you know, he's racked up a number of indictments. I mean, he did get a conviction of Manafort, although that was way off the reservation and out of control. The fact is, Manafort did commit those crimes, so he can point to that. He can point to a bunch of Russians that they'll never appear in court that he indicted in the Soviet Union. I call it the Soviet Union because that's, in fact, what it still is. And a bunch of other people, you know, so the show is only an hour. We can't go through, you know, all the different indictments one by one. But, you know, he's got his pound of flesh, clearly. And at this point, and I got to give the president some credit here, is that although his tweeting sometimes has been counterproductive, he did put Mueller on the defensive, and that may have had some impact. But it remains to be seen. Do not expect the president to be unscathed. You know, the high fives that we see on Fox News, I think, are premature, and this is not going to be a really favorable report, guaranteed.
How do you feel exactly that the tweeting put Robert Mueller on the defensive?
Well, I mean, calling it a witch hunt every day, you know, I think Mueller wants to look like he's part, you know, of a ethical establishment right now, and it may have, in fact, lessen some of the impact. But I don't know that. I don't know that. What I do take issue with is that this matter should have been over a lot sooner. I mean, we heard from the president's lawyers. I've been critical, now for 2 years. They've been predicting an end. First, it was within 6 months, then it was a year, then it was a year and a half, then it was 2 years, now it's 2.5 years. They let the president get dragged along to the guillotine. And I don't think it's going to be a pretty picture when this report comes out. But here's something that people should understand. By department guidelines, the only thing that the department is really able to talk about are those who were indicted, those who have criminal charges against them. Is that to release this entire report with all of the people that were called in front of the grand jury, including my good friend and client Jerry Corsi, would be against department guidelines because they haven't been indicted. And that creates the opportunity to smear these people, to destroy their lives without them having due process to be able to defend themselves. One of the few people who truly understands this, and I have to give credit to him, is Mark Levin. I was listening to him on the radio yesterday. Mark understands because he's a lawyer. But Tom Fitton does not understand. He's not a lawyer. And Sarah Carter clearly is not a lawyer. And people like that don't understand. And for those on Fox News who are saying release the entire report, that would be blasphemy. That would harm people who were never indicted and never did anything wrong. And that has to come first. So we'll see what kind of cojones, as they say in Hispanic, in Spanish, that Barr has. But I think he's going to cave in. I think there's going to be a lot of people hurt with this report.
That's an interesting detail, that just releasing the whole thing might affect the rights of people who aren't, in fact, guilty of anything. Mark Levin has got some really amazing insights. He's maybe a little bit polarizing for some people, but I enjoy him as well. So if I understood that correctly, you're saying that the report's going to contain information that if they just release it could, what do you mean by the opportunity to ruin people's lives? Who are we thinking of there? People we don't know about?
When you go in front of a grand jury, this is a prosecutorial exercise. It's not like being even a deposition, in a civil case or a criminal case where you have your lawyer there. You don't have your lawyer there. The prosecutor can do whatever he or she wants. And, you can throw something out that had nothing to do with anything to see how the witness reacts or the target or the subject reacts if you bring them in front of a grand jury. And it doesn't mean that it's true. It's there, and it's on transcripts. And you can show documents that have nothing to do with the persons that's in front of the grand jury. So there's a great opportunity there, if you release this information, to smear them. And that's why you have Rule 6E of the Rules of Criminal Procedure. That's why, we were bringing cases, and we still have those cases in effect, for Special Counsel Robert Mueller leaking information out of the grand jury. That's criminal. You can't do that. So consequently, they can't release the whole report. And we'll see what kind of basically fortitude William Barr has, the current Attorney General, or whether he caves in to the masses, to the crowds, to the people that are at the barricades wanting to bring the president down.
So the feeling among the Rachel Maddows and the Anderson Coopers of the world is that releasing the entire report, everybody's created this illusion, it seems, Larry, that William Barr is going to protect Donald Trump, but you and I don't believe that. Anything that he's doing right now, at best, would be in compliance with the law, and at worst would be to favor Robert Mueller, more likely, right?
Well, more likely in the sense that the whole thing is going to get out, and the Democrats are going to have so much to work with at that point. Whether or not anybody's guilty of anything, and like I said, I don't believe the president's guilty of collusion or guilty of obstruction of justice. He was entitled to fire whoever he wanted. He's the chief executive officer. He's the president.
Plenty of good reasons to have fired James Comey. I'm sorry to interrupt, but he failed to investigate Hillary Clinton.
He should have fired a lot more people, you know. He was held back by his lawyers. I think he should have exercised his authority. He should have exercised authority with the Department of Justice to release information with regard to the FISA warrant and things like that. But, it's unlikely that this report is going to, quote, exonerate the president in the political realm. And you can pretty much be assured the Democrats are going to be at the door of impeachment very quickly, and they have a lot of material that Mueller is going to give them. Now, there is another theory here. It's a very interesting theory. And someone who's close to me, raised this with me today. And just to be fair, Andrew Weissman recently left kind of precipitously before the report even came out. He left in a very public way. He wanted people to know that he was leaving. So hypothetical, did Andrew Weissman push for the indictment of Donald Jr.? Did he push for the indictment of Jared Kushner or even Ivanka Trump or others in and around the president? Did Barr stop him from doing that because Barr had the authority to do that, figuring, okay, the report is enough, well, I'll just let that come out? That's an interesting theory as to why he basically left so publicly before this report even issued. So we'll see what Barr did. You know, I'm an optimist in a sense, Jason. I don't want to condemn people just for the sake of doing it. When people hear me on your show and other shows being very critical, it's because I've reached critical mass. I get to the point where I get frustrated and I just can't stand the bullshit anymore, consequently.
I hear you. Yeah.
You know, and that's why I go after Fox, because they're two-faced. I mean, look at what they've done, you know, just in the last few weeks. They've, you know, banned Jeanine Pirro to purgatory because she talked about the fact that Ilham Omar may believe in Sharia law. Well, Ilham Omar does believe in Sharia law. In fact, she said that herself, you know, and those kinds of things. And then they hired Donna Brazile, who's a criminal, who fed questions to Hillary Clinton during the 2016 debates. They, you know, put on the board of directors of Fox, the new Fox. It's been carved away from 21st Century Fox as part of the merger with Disney. They put Paul Ryan on there. What could be worse than to put that Judas, that two-faced twit, for lack of a better word, that basically stabbed the president every step of the way, on the board of directors of Fox? And then just yesterday they hired somebody, some Democrat lawyer, you know, to be their legal counselor. I mean, it's unreal. So yeah, I got to speak out about stuff like that. I got to speak out about Fitton, who's not a lawyer, who gives legal opinions, who, you know, pounds his chest all the time because, frankly, I don't think he's very ethical. I mean, that's the bottom line. So I'll say that, but let me say good things about people too, because I do believe there are some people out there that are good people like you and others who deserve much greater respect than what we all get, because you're in the trenches. You're doing the hard thing. Laura Loomer's another one, okay? My clients are people who don't get the respect, who are good people, you know, like the Bundys, like Sheriff Joe Arpaio, like Judge Roy Moore, you know, and people like that. And Jerry, he never got the respect that he deserves. He's never been wrong about anything, frankly. He withdrew an article that he wrote recently just because it was based upon information that the Washington Times had published, and that turned out not to be correct. He had a right to rely on that at the time. So, you know, this is the situation that we have today, is that I want your listeners to understand that you're a real person. You believe in what you're doing. And sometimes, you know, we should say positive things. And it's possible that Barr may be doing the right thing here, but let's wait and see.
Yeah. And, you know, you remind me, Larry, that we want to tell people about freedomwatchusa.org. The work that you and your team are doing is not being done by anybody else. So viewers of Crowdsource the Truth should go over there and financially support Freedom Watch. You brought up Laura Loomer, and of course, Laura has been banned from Twitter. She has been doggedly pursuing Ilhan Omar and some of the more corrupt members of Congress, and Keith Ellison, who became the state attorney general in Missouri, or was Minneapolis? Where was it?
Minnesota.
Minnesota, sorry, that was terrible. But so Laura's got her, you're retooling the Twitter case. We've been hearing a lot about Devin Nunes suing his cow. Any new developments in the case of Laura Loomer and the class action that you're bringing against Twitter?
Well, yeah, we are retooling it. We're going to refile it. I'm going to make a strategic decision whether to refile it in front of this judge, Trevor McFadden, who doesn't seem to have the guts to do much of anything, a Trump appointee for that matter. Republican establishment recommended, unfortunately. He's probably a very nice man, but, you know, that's Washington. There are very few judges that have the guts, so I may file it in a different forum, in a different setting. It wasn't dismissed with prejudice, and he came up with this concept that in his mind our claim was not plausible. Well, you know what? That's not the standard at a 12b6 motion to dismiss. If we plead a cause of action, and that complaint was very specific, and you can see it at freedomwatchusa.org, you have to let it go to discovery. So how can you dismiss it even without prejudice? That means not forever. Before you allow for discovery, before we get into the files of Google, YouTube, of Twitter, of Apple, of Facebook, of Instagram, and the others. You can't do that.
Yeah.
But these judges don't want a hot potato in their courtroom. They don't want controversy. A lot of them want to go up to a higher level. They want to go up to the appellate court, or maybe someday even the Supreme Court. Kavanaugh was like that. They're all like that. Very few, not all, but there's a handful in my life, like I said last time, that aren't like that. But 99% are like that. They're politicians in robes. And that's why the country's gotten to the point where it is.
You've raised a great point, Larry. I've actually misspoken by referring to this as a suit against Twitter. What you've done is you looked at the legal minefield involved in bringing any action against these social media firms because they are protected by the Communications Decency Act, Section 230. They can hide behind that. It's been virtually impenetrable. There's been almost no success whatsoever from anyone who's brought a civil suit against a social media company like that. The approach that you've taken is to focus on the antitrust aspects of what these companies appear to be doing, refusal to deal and collusion and things like this, where they are all blocking out Laura Loomer and some of the other people that we've heard about. This is a really interesting legal strategy that has got a lot of chance to succeed.
And monopolization, okay? You know, the president himself has said that there's collusion here. There's restraint of trade, an agreement and restraint of trade. Others have talked about the monopolization of this social media industry. It's monopolization. Not only does Google, YouTube have a very large market share, but so does Facebook in particular. And together they form an oligopoly and are acting in concert to restrain trade and to monopolize this entire market. You know, Europe is actually more, I don't want to use the word progressive because in the United States progressive has a certain connotation.
Right.
But Europe actually, who copied our antitrust laws after World War II, as I explained last time, and I worked for the European Union's competition directorate as a young lawyer, as a stagiaire or an intern. I worked over there in DG4. And of Aurelio Papalardo, he was the chief, a very bright guy, is that Europe says abuse of a dominant position can be an antitrust violation. In other words, when you acquire that kind of market power, then you have a responsibility to the public not to discriminate, not to let competitors come in and bundle your product. I believe it was Google, YouTube just got hit with a large fine of $1 billion.
$1.7 billion.
Right, in Europe, because the way they structure their different technological tools, they exclude competitors because of their market power from participating in their network. And Europe says, no, that's not right. Europe is right about this. Now, unfortunately, Europe usually finds American companies and not their own, you see. So there's a politic there. But our antitrust law, in theory, works the same way. It's not as explicit. But we have to start using our antitrust laws. I'm a big believer in competition. And unfortunately, and this is interesting, you know, there's a large portion of the conservative movement that doesn't believe in competition, just like they don't believe that mass surveillance is something that's wrong. And this is where I buck heads against the conservative movement, even though I'm a conservative, because competition is what made this country great. That's what created capitalism. And we need more competition. It was Teddy Roosevelt who invented the antitrust laws. We know what a great president he was, how strong he was.
Right.
And the reason that antitrust was forced upon the Europeans, in particular the Germans, is because in the days leading up to World War II, it was the German industrialists who colluding came together, who supported Hitler, who were his sponsors. Mercedes, BMW, Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank financed the concentration camps. They paid for their construction.
Yeah.
And you know, interestingly enough, years ago, I know I'm rambling, Jason, but when I was at Judicial Watch and I blocked the sale of Clinton's house in Chappaqua, New York, the first time by bringing a shareholders derivative suit, I had a shareholder of Deutsche Bank. It was Clinton who financed this house at below market rates with the same bank that financed concentration camps in World War II. I mean, this is unbelievable. So, you know, this is Washington, D.C. It's the swamp. It's something which is terrible. I might add, to be fair here, is that the Trump organization has done business with Deutsche Bank, too. They'd be wise to not do business with them. This is an evil group of people.
Well, we're getting a little bit off topic, but it is interesting. You know, I just found this on The Verge. It seems back in July of 2018, Google was fined $5 billion in the EU for their phone operating system and antitrust violations related to Android. I wonder, Larry, is this the type of thing where they're just issuing these fines and Google just never pays it and kind of keeps litigating?
$5 billion is like a penny in our pocket, Jason.
Yeah.
These, if you add it up, what all these social media companies are worth, it would be several $100 trillion. I mean,
Wow.
They control the world today, and they are a monopoly. So why is our antitrust division? Why wasn't one of the first acts of Attorney General William Barr to open up at least a civil antitrust investigation into the alleged collusion of these social media companies? Why does Larry Klayman and Freedom Watch have to do the heavy lifting here? And then it goes in front of a judge who's scared of his shadow. So this is what we're dealing with today. It's my reason for being. It's Freedom Watch's reason for being. It's why we do at Freedom Watch today what I used to do at Judicial Watch. Yes, it's against long odds. You know, we don't always get the judges we want. But let me tell you something. Let me scratch my own back here. Is that with all the times that these politicized judges have dismissed cases, just in the last 6 years at Freedom Watch, we have scored 4 major victories, which is worth all the other, panty waist judges who dismissed cases that I have to refile. First of all, we enjoined the National Security Agency under Obama twice from illegal mass surveillance. That gave rise to a new law, the USA Freedom Act. And of course, they're violating that too, so we're still in court over that. Secondly, we were the ones that filed the first case against Obama's illegal amnesty for 5 million illegal aliens. And it was the 25 states that later brought a lawsuit that copied our complaint. We then intervened in their case when an Obama appointee, Burl Howell, dismissed our case in the District of Columbia. We went all the way to the Supreme Court with those 25 states, and we won. And we killed Obama's executive amnesty for 5 million illegal aliens. Then we won the Bundy case. I was behind the scenes doing that. I was doing other things, but I was instrumental, along with Ryan and others, in winning that case. And now, of course, Corsi, which maybe is the best legal and most satisfying victory I've had in addition to the Bundys. Because, you see, I call myself special prosecutor with Larry Klayman on my radio show, but you know what? I'm also special defense counsel. So I know this is a little bit of scratching my own back here, but those are 4 major victories. Now, where do you hear about that on Fox News? Where do you hear about that kind of stuff? You don't. And this is why Freedom Watch is so important. It's why you're so important in what you do. You're an investigative journalist. You allow me to talk to the American people because these are major victories, and we are the People's Justice Department. It's not Judicial Watch. I mean, documents are great, but you got to do something with the documents. They don't do much of anything with the documents. We're taking risks here, and that's what we've got to do with this antitrust lawsuit. We're pushing hard, and the European Union, is doing the right thing with regard to these American companies. The problem is they do it mostly with regard to American companies and let their own companies get away with murder. In the United States, we don't do anything here, so at least they're doing something.
Yeah. And Larry, there was just this article yesterday in the Washington Examiner, which is talking about President Trump's reaction to some of this. He totally opposes the regulation of social media companies. I don't know that we're talking about regulating them so much as removing this blanket indemnity afforded by the Communications Decency Act, Section 230, an over 20-year-old law that was written to deal with dial-up modem bulletin board systems that had nowhere near the pervasive nature and influence on day-to-day life of average people that these social media companies have. So it certainly needs some revisiting. I'm just surprised that Devin Nunes is taking the route that a normal citizen would take rather than, as he could, as a sitting congressman, introducing some legislation. I tweeted at Makan Del Rahim, who is the Assistant Attorney General in charge of antitrust, and I asked him, when will the DOJ begin an antitrust investigation into social media companies, including their refusal to deal with Alex Jones, Laura Loomer, etc. And Devin Nunes is simply suing Devin Nunes' cow.
Well, I don't know. Maybe antitrust law doesn't exist under Sharia law. I don't know.
Oh.
But let me back up a little bit. That's a joke, okay?
Yeah.
I'm not on Fox, so I won't be removed. Okay. But the reason for antitrust law, you raised a very good point. The antitrust law is the exact opposite of regulation. So going back to the breakup of AT&T, and I was on the trial team that broke up AT&T back in 1970s, late 1970s. Shows you I'm, getting up there. Okay, even though I only look like I'm 35. I'm joking, of course. But
It's open mic night at Freedom Watch.
Right, but what happened is that the government, at that time we had kind of a quasi-government that actually did things from time to time. The government decided they couldn't regulate AT&T, that AT&T was submitting these tariffs, these rates, to the Federal Communications Commission, and they were never able to justify how they were calculating the rates that they were charging consumers and companies to use their service. So because they couldn't regulate AT&T, there's a famous antitrust case called Ottertail Power, which says that you can lose your antitrust exemption. These public utilities have antitrust exemptions. AT&T had an antitrust exemption under our law, and that's why they were regulated. Insurance companies have an antitrust exemption. The NFL and Major League Baseball have antitrust exemptions.
Wow.
Well, the government said, the Justice Department, we can't regulate them anymore because we don't know whether these rates are legitimate or not. We think they're overcharging to consumers and to others who use the service, corporate services. So we're going to bring an antitrust case, and we're going to use civil investigative demands and get documentation and testimony to find out if, in fact, they are colluding, whether they're price fixing, dividing markets, etc. And lo and behold, when the Justice Department, when it was still doing something in a noble way, and I was extremely proud to be on the antitrust investigation of AT&T, very dedicated people that would work 18 hours a day, and ultimately we broke up AT&T and we created competition in the telecommunications industry, whether it was with regard to equipment or services or whatever. I worked on the part of the case that dealt with MCI. That was the precursor to Verizon. MCI had gotten a $1.8 billion judgment against AT&T, which was a lot of money at that time. Now it's basically, pennies in your pocket. And, they proved in a court of law that AT&T, was fixing prices, that they were excluding them from the industry, like the European Union recently found with regard to Google, YouTube. So that's why you have the antitrust laws. That's so you don't have to regulate, you see? So the president says, I don't want to regulate, then okay, then let's use the antitrust law to make sure that there's competition.
That seems like something that President Trump would be behind because he's a staunch capitalist. So, right, I get what he's saying. It's not about regulating him. It's about using the laws that we already have. This is something that you're doing. It remains really perplexing to me, this route that Devin Nunes has gone. We've got Sarah Shepard saying that Devin Nunes is an idiot and that he's going to damage the First Amendment if he succeeds. He's suing both Twitter and parody accounts and a journalist for retweeting an unfavorable headline.
No, you're right, Jason. But look, he took the low-hanging fruit. He took what was easy, okay? So, he got some lawyer, as you pointed out, not the best lawyer in the world, to put it mildly, who's had issues before. And he files this thing for public relations purposes. He knows that Fox is going to help him promote it, but in fact, it's not worth the paper the complaint is written on, and is creating a false sense of hope and expectation when he should be working with his colleagues to at least neutrally get an antitrust investigation going, to push for that. And it doesn't have to be Larry Klayman and Freedom Watch all alone. It can be the U.S. Department of Justice. When I was a young guy, there were two areas of the government that a lawyer wanted to work for. This was like going, I don't want to use the word because I wouldn't even send my kid to Harvard, but it was considered to be the top. And if you wanted to be a government lawyer, the two places you'd want to work the most was the Antitrust Division of the U.S. Department of Justice and the Security and Exchange Commission. That was the highest level of what you could do as a lawyer. And I was so proud to be there. But it was conservative administrations that put them on ice, not Reagan. Okay, Reagan pushed the AT&T case, although it started under President Nixon. Nixon was a free trader.
Wow.
And so was Reagan in some respects, although his legs were cut out from under him, in international trade. They did a lot of things to try to restrain free trade. But Reagan was basically a free trader. But the Republican Party after that became very protective of these large corporate interests. The Democrats, love the union interest. The Republicans use the large corporate interest, and they dominate. They scratch the backs of the Republicans. They help them get elected. And of course, they didn't like the antitrust laws, and the antitrust laws went by the books by and large, in terms of by and large, by government enforcement. Now, the antitrust laws were always still there for private parties to use. And that's why I'm using it today when the Justice Department is doing nothing. And I would like to see, these social media companies broken up and create some competition, as well as to be regulated through antitrust law and not through regulation, to not fix prices, not divide markets, not to discriminate against conservatives, people of faith, and others, but to in fact compete on a fair basis.
Yeah, and I mean, what you're describing to us kind of illustrates how complicated the law can be. It's not about just, I'm upset at this person, they've said something defamatory, let me sue them. Because if this is intended to be PR for Devin Nunes, I think he needs a new PR company. The Fresno Bee, his hometown paper, is just reporting yesterday that Republicans in the town there are rescheduling their annual dinner after the Nunes Twitter beef explodes. So there's no shortage of puns coming out now that Devin Nunes has sued the parody accounts Devin Nunes Cow and Devin Nunes Mom. So if this was
Jason,
intended...
this is really true. If you ever want to hire a lawyer, and maybe I'm kind of making a case against myself in some ways because I'm very well known, and half the country loves what I do, the other half doesn't like what I do so much, depending on political ideologies. But the best lawyers and the best doctors are not the ones that appear in airline magazines. Okay,
right.
They're the ones that you don't even hear about. Okay,
right.
and they're out there, and unfortunately, cable news networks like Fox News, they seize onto people, they make them a quote star, but these are not the best and the brightest. And those people that are working in the trenches, that aren't looking for PR all the time, that are doing their job, are the ones who actually get the job done. Unfortunately, in the legal profession, however, is that 99% of all lawyers play it safe. They want to make money, they want the status. They go to a bar, pick up a girl by giving them their card that I'm a lawyer, whatever the case may be.
Right.
Big deal, who cares? But in other professions, the doctors, for instance, that are really the great doctors are not the ones you always read about. And the best people in media like you are not the ones that get the notoriety that is deserved.
Thank you, Larry. So there's a couple questions coming up in the live chat here about Dr. Corsi. Just to clarify, so it's for sure that Dr. Corsi, there's nothing hiding in the Mueller report that's going to ruin Dr. Corsi's week on Monday, right? We know that he's in the clear. It's been reported a couple different places that he's been vindicated.
Well, here's the irony, Jason, is that Dr. Corsi brought a criminal complaint against Robert Mueller and people on his staff. We also filed bar complaints because he was being forced into testifying falsely or be indicted. That's not ethical. We brought a $350 million damage suit against Robert Mueller and the deep state intelligence agencies for illegal surveillance and leaks and everything else. So, we didn't roll over, but we did establish respect with the special counsel. We didn't collaborate with the special counsel. In fact, if Dr. Corsi's ever subpoenaed to testify in the Stone case, he'll testify truthfully. He's not going to go there willingly. Now, just remember that it was Dr. Corsi who was exonerated. He was never indicted, but Stone was for alleged obstruction of justice and threatening to kill a witness and his dog and lying under oath. These are the allegations. There's a world of difference between Dr. Corsi and Robert Stone, and Roger Stone, but he's still not He's never said anything to hurt Stone. To the contrary, Stone has defamed him and has defamed me. And we have lawsuits on that, thinking that he could be coerced, Corsi, into saying something, that would help Stone, in front of grand juries, Congress, or a trial. But what I'm basically saying here is that Dr. Corsi has nothing to worry about. He always told the truth. And when he didn't remember something, he went back to the special counsel and he said, look, I'm amending my testimony. He turned over all the documents. He played it straight. So he's got nothing to worry about. I don't care what innuendo or whatever is in that report. The fact speaks for itself. There's a concept in the law called res ipsa loquitur. The fact speaks for itself. Corsi wasn't indicted. Stone was. That's a world of difference. And if you play it straight, same thing in any aspect. When you're dealing with the government, you always tell the truth. It's not a crime sometimes to, do things that you may in fact be criticized for. But if you tell the truth, you'll never be found to have committed any crime in these kinds of situations. So I'm confident that Dr. Corsi, has not only been exonerated, but he has the rubber stamp of the special counsel. But one other thing I want to say, which is very interesting, is that when we brought these lawsuits against Mueller and filed these complaints, that we established a certain respect. It's kind of like, I remember when I was in third grade and I switched schools from Philadelphia, a very rough school, to the mainline Philadelphia. And the first day, someone by the name of Chris Caswell hit me in gym class, okay? And I was taught to fight, and I fought back. And we became good friends after that. Well, I'm not saying that we became friends with Robert Mueller. We don't collaborate with him or anybody else, but you establish respect when you stand up for your rights. And from the point that I came into this case for Jerry Corsi, from the point that we filed these complaints, is that Aaron Zelinsky of the Office of Special Counsel was extremely respectful to me and to Corsi. And I think he understood that he was dealing with someone that wasn't going to be rolled, that wasn't going to be turned. And that's the way you have to deal with the government. You cannot let them think that they have you. You can't let them think that you're going to roll over. You can't it's like a dog. When you go down the street, if there's a vicious, rabid dog and he thinks, and you think that dog's going to bite you, and the dog sees that, the dog will bite you.
Yeah.
And that's the way we handled this case, is that we established the respect because we pushed back, and we never collaborated with the special counsel. We never collaborated with anybody on the Democrats, but yet they respect us because we know that we can't be rolled.
Yeah, absolutely. The only way to handle a bully is to punch back. So that's good to hear, Larry. I think everybody is pleased to know that Dr. Corsi has navigated this rough patch relatively unscathed. Obviously, he's had the emotional stress of dealing with it, and hopefully it's close to an end. Shifting gears just a bit,
now,
Larry.
let me add there, Jason, I do
Sure.
a little bit of an advertisement. It put him on his financial knees.
Yeah.
And, Roger Stone, did a lot of harm to Corsi, too. That's why we brought lawsuits with the defamation and calling him an alcoholic and, calling him a liar and this and that. I mean, did a lot of damage. So he does need help, and I hope people will contribute to his legal defense fund. And there is a way to do that. And, you can go up and see the press release I issued today. He could use some help here because he is, and those are used for paying legal fees. It's not over because we now have to deal with Gerald Nadler, the head of the Judiciary Committee on the Democrat side, of Adam Schiff. Still a witch hunt. They'll never, be able to succeed because they have no power to indict, but they can do a lot of damage in terms of reputation and harassment, and that's what they intend to do. And we're still, fighting those wars. So he does need the help.
Let's talk about Adam Schiff for a moment, Larry, because it seems pretty clear from everything he's said and everything that he does, and even from the bizarre way that his eyes bug out of his head basically all the time, he's intent on carrying on this smear of the 45th president of the United States. And what are the legal implications if this Mueller report comes out and says we've spent 2 years investigating and have found no evidence of crime? On what basis can Adam Schiff and his fellow maniacs continue to investigate a U.S. citizen, a man who there's no evidence of crime, Donald Trump, the president? Why can they just keep investigating ad nauseum?
Well, it's because Congress has given themselves immunity to do virtually anything they want, unless they're caught red-handed, taking a bribe. They have carte blanche to violate the law. If you're on the Senate floor and the House floor and you want to defame someone, you're immune. I mean, it's unbelievable from prosecution. If you walk outside of the chambers and say something, you may not be immune. But these are the ways they protect themselves, and they are the new American nobility. And Adam Schiff can use all of these powers now that talk about Paul Ryan sitting on the board of Fox News now. Paul Ryan is responsible for the fact that the Democrats took over the House. The guy bailed out as Speaker of the House. Now he's got huge lobbying jobs. You can imagine what he's making on the board of directors of Fox News. And he left a sinking ship. And now we've got Adam Schiff, Gerald Nadler, Maxine Waters, Nancy Pelosi. You can put this at the feet of Paul Ryan because he sold the president out in the last 2.5 years as Speaker of the House. And, the Republicans didn't show up and vote like they would have voted otherwise because they were just disgusted at the Republicans and their lack of courage.
So basically, Congress doesn't have to adhere to the law. That's absurd. I know that they're not bound by the laws of insider trading and stuff like that. See, I think, Larry, most Americans don't know this. That's so shocking that would be allowed. I mean, if you are a citizen who's investigated for a crime and the police conclude their investigation and determine that you didn't do it, you can't now get somebody else to come along and decide to keep investigating. It's like double jeopardy or something, it seems.
No, it's unbelievable. The attitude up there is unbelievable. I can tell you, even among some of my friends who were congressmen at the time, is that they develop an attitude, not Bob Barr, but, others, that everything's coming to them. I mean, you go to dinner with them and they expect you to take your money out of your wallet. They go to park at National Airport, Reagan Airport now, parking's for free. They have all these franking privileges where they can mail all kinds of stuff that helps them get reelected. It's for free. It's unreal, Jason, what goes on up there. It's like Sodom and Gomorrah. I worked there as a young intern for Senator Richard Schweiker. He was an honest man. But I sat there at the auto pen. In those days, there was an auto pen that would sign letters with letters on the same subject, 6 different letters from left to right to get constituents to think that you believed in what they believe in, okay? And that was the beginning. You could read my book, Horse, where I became, a revolutionary, a renegade. And that's why I do what I do, because it's a charade on Capitol Hill, and it is a constant subterfuge against the American people's interest. They accomplish nothing. And I'm still a perpetual optimist. I like to find those people who actually want to do something.
Yeah.
I like Mark Meadows, Yeah. I think he's good, but he can't do anything because he's been neutralized by everybody else up there.
Right.
When Boehner was Speaker of the House, these people, Michelle Bachmann, I loved Michelle Bachmann. I thought she was great. But, she was never allowed to walk into the Speaker's house then, which was John Boehner. She was ostracized. And the people that are in control are part of this Republican establishment, the same people that put on CPAC and American Conservative Union and the Federalist Society. And that's why we have these worthless Trump judges up there right now. Most of them are worthless. So, it's a real problem. American people are reaching the point of, total exasperation, if not revolution. I don't want to see that.
Yeah. I think Mark Meadows got yelled at by Rashida Tlaib in a very inappropriate exchange. Larry, Margot's just shared with me from the Discord chat on patreon.com this CNBC article, which was earlier today, claiming that Barr is reviewing Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia report with Rosenstein.
Isn't that unbelievable?
Why would he be doing that?
Rosenstein's still there. And one of the things that my radio show this week, I hope people will go listen to it at freedomwatchusa.org. You can find it at radioamerica.com. I announced that the first person indicted of our citizens' grand juries, which are going to be starting in the next few weeks, I was actually working on that this week. That's why I was so busy, is going to be to indict Rosenstein. He's a traitor.
Yeah.
And he's the one who was going to wire himself to try to get information to use against Trump to convince.
That's unbelievable.
He's a traitor. He's a disgusting human being. And they left him there. You know why they left him there?
Why?
There's an old adage: keep your enemies close.
Right.
Okay. They figured he'd do more damage on the outside than keeping them there, but he shouldn't be sitting there with Attorney General William Barr right now. And that may be some of the difficulty that Barr's having in coming up with a summary of what went on, because Rosenstein rubber stamped everything that Mueller wanted. Everything. He's the one who had him appointed. Rosenstein is a holdover from the Obama administration. He was U.S. Attorney for the District of Maryland. You know, he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. He's no Republican. He's no conservative. He's a traitor to this country.
Let's talk for a minute, Larry, about how Rosenstein actually appointed Robert Mueller in May of 2017. Now, back when you became the first attorney to receive a judgment against a sitting president of the United States, against Bill Clinton for perjuring himself. And of course, Kenneth Starr was the special counsel who was investigating Clinton allegations of lying under oath and so many different things that Bill Clinton was doing. There was actually a statute that regulated the appointment and the operations of a special counsel, but it's changed since then. Can you describe for the viewers a little bit about how things are different now and why Rosenstein was able to appoint Mueller without Senate confirmation and all that?
In reality, Jason, it's not that much different from the independent counsel law. That was a particular law that Democrats and Republicans put into effect after the Nixon era. Okay, so you'd have an independent person doing investigation. In theory, that's a good idea, but you've got to get the right person, and you frequently don't get the right person. You either get crazy people like Lawrence Walsh in the Iran-Contra investigation, or you get people like Ken Starr who didn't know what he was doing. He was a appellate lawyer, and the Clintons ate him up. You know, they ground him up and spit him out at the time. He was hoping he'd be a Supreme Court justice. That's how badly he was damaged.
Huh.
And you know, he covered up the death of Vince Foster and you know, all kinds of other things. But the independent counsel law was to create a situation where you would remove the politics out of the Justice Department that we saw during the Nixon era. It didn't work too well, and the Democrats and Republicans agreed to end it. But then they brought back this special counsel. It's an internal Justice Department set of regulations. So it's essentially the same thing, but they just call it something else.
But it's not governed by law anymore. It's just a policy. Is that the difference?
Yeah, it's not congressional, and it's a policy inside of the Justice Department that was created to allow the Justice Department to have independent analysis and prosecutions of various things. Well, you know, I'm misspeaking a little bit. You know, there is a congressional statute, but it's very, very loose. It turns over the authority to the Department of Justice. So the Justice Department decided the rules of the game to play by.
I was going to say, it sounds to me like this is just another way for them to sort of do whatever the hell they want.
They do whatever the hell they want. But I'll tell you something. You know, in my book, at the end,
yeah,
I make certain recommendations, whores, why and how I came to fight the establishment. I recommend that we have a separate Ministry of Justice or Department of Justice apart from the other three branches of government. A lot of people think that's not a good idea because it, you know, create too much power. But look at Israel, for instance. Israel has its Ministry of Justice separate from the rest of the government. Israel, contrary to the United States, has held prime ministers accountable. Now, sometimes it gets out of control, like it is now with Netanyahu. They're indicting him because his wife, you know, hired a caterer, you know, to cater people at the prime minister's residence, or, you know, did a few minor things with regard to the media there, so we get good press coverage. It can be out of control. But historically, our Justice Department has covered up crimes, you know, by the president, and that is a problem. And we need to come up with a new system with honest people who don't play the game that Mueller played or play the game that Lawrence Walsh played, you know, to the crowd. There was another one, I forget his first name, Patrick, you know, in, you know, dealing with Scooter Libby, who wound up indicting him, and he actually should have indicted Dick Cheney instead of Scooter Libby for what went on with Valerie Plame.
Right.
But that's what they do. They usually indict the low-hanging fruit here,
yeah,
you know, middle-level people, and they leave the higher-ups to fend for themselves.
Right. So, Larry, just back to social media for a moment. There's a little bit of a shift. There was a dust-up I guess this was kind of in 2018 when we heard that there would be various bodies policing the internet for so-called fake news. And one of those was the self-proclaimed anti-hate group, the Southern Poverty Law Center. They've been having a pretty rough week. Their surprisingly Jewish founder and CEO, a guy named Richard Cohen, has announced that he's resigning, and he's not the first of their top management to go. What do you know about this Southern Poverty Law Center shakeup?
I've been up against them for many years. I basically ignore them because I never had any respect for them, and in my view, they're a bad joke. But they name anybody who's a conservative and is an activist as part of a hate group. That's what they did. Now we know that they're actually the hate group. They hate people of faith. They hate conservative Jews. They hate evangelicals. They hate anybody who isn't like them. And now they're crumbling for alleged financial irregularities. And, thank God the Wicked Witch is finally melting because they're a hate group themselves. And, it's what we talked about in the last show, Jason, is that I'm very proud of my heritage. I've said that many times, being Jewish, also being Messianic. I'm a Jewish Christian, in effect. But the Jewish left is very destructive of the Jewish people. It's very destructive of Israel. These people hate Israel. They want it destroyed. To me, it's more than an embarrassment to our people. It's something that we need to address, and that's why I formed the Coalition of the Jewish Right, because I don't want the American people or people throughout the world to think that Jewish people are this way. They're not. The great majority are not. But there is this leftist bunch, starting with Karl Marx, going on to Leon Trotsky, Saul Alinsky, and there are people like that who have been very destructive of our people, and they've been very destructive of this country, and they're fomenting anti-Semitism because people are seeing this, and they're saying, oh, this must be the Jewish people. Well, it's not the Jewish people any more than Jesus Christ, should have been crucified because he was a Jewish rabbi. Okay, so this is what we're dealing with today, and I want to address it. I want to legally eliminate these people, frankly.
Yeah, well, certainly Mr. Cohen in the photographs there, he doesn't look anti-hate. He looks pretty pissed off to me.
Yeah, well, he's got a few problems. Let's say we don't wish him well these days.
Yeah, there were also allegations. Sorry?
Yeah, I also get a laugh at Right Wing Watch because, they're always poking fun at me and this and that. Wonket is another one. They're just very hateful groups out there.
Yeah.
Daily Beast. I've sued them recently.
Daily Beast is an interesting publication. Right Wing Watch.
The Nation. Let's not forget about The Nation, who are a bunch of communists. It's unreal.
Yeah. Right Wing Watch did us a pretty good favor last time we had Laura with us, Larry. They published our interview right on their front page, where Laura had basically said she had no sympathy for Jamal Khashoggi, and I think this was counter to what they were trying to do, because they published the photo of Khashoggi holding the rocket-propelled grenade and standing there with the Mujahideen, a photo perhaps that not everyone had seen. So thank you to Right Wing Watch for helping us to get the word out there. We're getting pretty close to the end of our hour here for today, Larry. Was there anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap it up tonight?
Well, I just want to say that thank God, because Jerry Corsi is a great man. He's got a great family, his wife, his children, his stepchildren, and I really am thankful that he was exonerated and not indicted. And, yesterday, I'll tell you something, even the left, I try to reach out to them. I try to tell them that, we will treat you with respect if you treat us with respect. I even sent a little email to Jeffrey Toobin, who's going after me after all these years. And I said, look, I appreciate the fair commentary that you made on CNN yesterday. Interestingly enough, CNN played it more straight than Fox did yesterday after this thing came out. You can go back and look at Anderson Cooper's show, because they realized that they stuck their neck out,
right,
that they went way beyond what they should go, and they wanted to keep some degree of credibility. And even Jeffrey Toobin sent me an email today, and Jerry Corsi, and said, from a personal perspective, I'm happy for you. Of course, he wanted Jerry strung up from a professional perspective.
Right.
earlier, but at least we got that out of them. So,
But you raise an important point, Larry, because Dr. Corsi has really been a pioneer in the world of independent media, alternative view, news, whatever you want to call it. But he's been out front. And I mean, listen, I know there's a lot of ongoing legal stuff with InfoWars, but I personally feel badly that there's been all this disruption in InfoWars. Alex Jones, irrespective of how people feel about him personally or his delivery, has also been a real pioneer. So I think aside from all of the personal and legal struggles that these individuals have had, there's a lot of blood on the road, so to speak, as far as the impact this has had on independent media and what implications that might have for the 2020 election.
Well, that's right, and that's why what you're doing is so important. So I urge people to support Crowdsource the Truth, and please support freedomwatchusa.org. Support Dr. Corsi. Support Clive and Bundy Defense Fund.org, because we're fighting uphill in that one. We're trying to bring in the whistleblower that said there was a kill list on the Bundys to open up the record.
Larry,
because if that's reversed and we lose at the trial level, again, the Bundys, could undergo life imprisonment. So we need to keep fighting. So far we've won, but we can't let our guard down.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of important cases ongoing at freedomwatchusa.org. I think everybody watching Crowdsource the Truth is really proud of the work that you and your team are doing, Larry. I think I know the answer to this, but Spanman is asking if you support AIPAC. I think you've said in the past that you don't like AIPAC. Is that correct?
It's neither. I don't like lobbyists, okay? But AIPAC does some things which I think are positive. Okay, Israel does need support. I'm not like AIPAC. I wouldn't be a member of AIPAC. I don't go to AIPAC. But if people are supporting the state of Israel and they need the help, and you can see what's going on today, I think that's a good thing. And I don't think they're, in and of themselves, there are not, all the people there are not bad people.
Yeah. All right, Larry. Well, thanks for taking the time. I know it's getting late where you are over there, and thank you for taking the time out of your evening to help explain some of these things. In 1 hour from now, I'm going to have a retired Secret Service agent and former U.S. Customs and Border Protection agent John Carmen with me. So I hope people will tune in at 10 o'clock Eastern. And John asked me to say hello, Larry. I'm not sure
Thanks,
if you...
Jason.
Remember,
do we have
John?
30 seconds?
We do,
AIPAC?
absolutely. Please.
Okay. Years ago, the head of AIPAC was the hand-picked political hack of Barack Obama. And I went over to him. I actually went to a dinner there because I wanted to go meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Who was this guy?
I forget his name. He was from Chicago, and he was part of the Chicago Mafia with Obama.
Huh.
A Jewish leftist. But I went to the dinner because I knew Mark Regev, who was the press secretary of Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I had proposed to do a Hollywood tribute to Israel to push back against Obama, who was so anti-Semitic and so anti-Israel. And I went up to him, and I said, why don't we try to work together to put this on? And he looked at me like I had landed from Pluto. Like I'm going to ever help you, Larry, to do this, even though it was for a common good for Israel. So yes. There are lobbyist hacks at AIPAC, and I don't associate with lobbyists, but if you can work with people to get a positive result, and Jewish people don't have dual loyalties, but they recognize that our heritage, our Judeo-Christian heritage, comes from the Holy Land, whether you're Jewish or Christian, and that's our foundation. And if Israel ceases to exist, this country's in a lot of trouble, not just from a strategic standpoint, but from our own morality, ethics, and belief in God.
Yeah, and I think I share your belief that Israel also serves a function as a democracy in the Middle East and an important military strategic ally for the United States. But this is a whole other...
Let me just say one other thing, and
Sure.
I know I'm abusing the time, but that the first seal that Jefferson and Adams and Franklin came up with for the United States was a chariot of Moses. Was Moses fleeing the Pharaoh in Egypt, crossing the Red Sea. This was going to be our emblem for the United States. not the eagle. Okay, so they recognized, the founding fathers, that the Judeo-Christian ethic and belief in God was the foundation of this country. And it remains so today, at least it's slipping away, I might add, because of people that want to tear it down. But there's no denying that the Judeo-Christian ethic and legal system is the foundation of this country. It is not Sharia law.
Well said, Larry. I think I've found an image of that first seal, I believe, so people are looking at that right now. Anybody who is interested in hearing more about Larry's history in the Department of Justice and his history navigating the swamp can purchase the book Whores, Why and How I Came to Fight the Establishment. And also, if you're on freedomwatchusa.org, and if you become a sponsor of Freedom Watch by donating $250 or more, Larry's going to send you an entire 4-work volume of all the books he's written. So that's a good way to get great value for your money and to support Freedom Watch and the work that Larry and his team are doing over there. Larry, thanks so much for joining me tonight.
Jason, you're a very good friend, and
thank you.
I thank God that you are my friend.
Likewise, Larry, I'm flattered, and thank you for saying so. Have a great weekend, and thanks for watching, everybody. I'll be back in just an hour. Don't miss John Carmen at 10.